Good morning. So I'm here to speak to you this morning about human dignity and rival concepts of human dignity that we need to be aware of. And then in my workshop this afternoon, I'm going to be expanding upon that to connect human dignity to how we understand religious freedom. But I'm going to do something to start off that's a bit different. And some of you, it's audience participation. Some of you might not be totally comfortable with this, and that's fine, but if you are, please follow along with what I'm going to be doing. So can I get everybody to please stand up? Okay, and I'm going to call my friend Derek out to help me out with this. Now, just turn to the person next to you, or just sort of find someone that you can partner with. Now, in typical human interaction, even between brothers and sisters in Christ, when we talk with someone, this is about the maximum or sort of distance or minimum distance you want to have between two people, right? Roughly about this amount. Now, if I move closer to Derek like this, it's a little less comfortable. But I want to focus today on what does it mean to encounter another person, and to be able to see in that person the image and likeness of God. So I want each of you with the person that you've partnered with to turn and face one another and get to that just slightly uncomfortable distance. Okay? I can see this is unraveling already. Okay. So just everybody simmer down. I know it's kind of comical. But now what I want you to do, in silence, for the next 30 seconds, I want you to look into that other person's eyes. Okay, so... Okay, if everybody just could get silence. This only works if you're quiet. It's okay to have the odd little giggle. Okay, so we're going to start in 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Thanks. Whew. Is this what you crazy Catholics do all the time? So, of course, there's a little bit of discomfort with that because we're not used to that closeness, especially with someone maybe we don't know very well. But when you stare into that other person's eyes, you are encountering something. Imagine if no one looked at you, ever. Imagine if no one, person over there doesn't want to be looked at. Imagine if no one looked at you, ever. No one ever looked at you on the street. No one ever looked at you at church. No one ever looked at you in your family. No one ever looked at you when you're at work. Imagine if no one ever smiled at you. Imagine if no one talked to you. Imagine if no one ever desired to get to know who you are in your personhood. In ancient Greek thought, there was this concept of the prosopon, the face. Initially was meant to also mean mask. But it becomes baptized in Christian thought, and we see In the New Testament, in the original Greek, this reference, especially in the writings of the Holy Apostle Paul, in the epistles of Paul, this reference to the prosopon. And when Paul speaks about the prosopon, he's talking about the face, the human face through which we can encounter the face of Christ. So here's the question around human dignity. Do we believe in the Incarnation, yes or no? Do we believe that God came down to this earth and took on human flesh in the womb of the Mother of God, of the Virgin Mary, and became a human like us in all things but sin? Do we believe that? Because that's a radical idea. And Christianity is the only faith that professes anything that profound about God. God made man. The Incarnation is the most radical event in all of history. And its impact is what you just experienced in that awkward 30 seconds. Because what you were encountering in that other person is the image and likeness of God. Looking into that person's eyes, you, despite the awkwardness, you immediately understood at a very foundational level who that person is. They are incarnate, body, mind, spirit. And in that body, mind, and spirit that you were encountering, as Christians, we understand that there the human person is present, there Christ is present, and in our encounters with one another, we are called to see Christ. We are called to see that Imago Dei. And if you confess the Incarnation, then you're also confessing a belief in the inherent dignity of every person, because that dignity derives from that image and likeness of God. Back in the 8th century, Christians were at each other's throats in the Eastern Mediterranean and into the parts of Turkey and where the church sort of has its foundations. And what were they fighting over? They're fighting over images. They're fighting over icons. In the Byzantine tradition and in the tradition of the early church, those who defended the use of icons in Christian worship and in Christian devotion were called the iconodoules. Doulos is Greek for servant, those who served the icons. Those who rejected icons were called iconoclasts, the smashers of images. And iconoclasts and iconodoules fought for a long period in the 8th century, killing one another, Christians killing one another over this question of images. One of the great defenders of icons was St. John of Damascus. And St. John of Damascus said, "I do not worship matter," by which he meant paint and egg tempera and gold and wood that icons are painted on. "I do not worship matter. I worship the God who became matter for my salvation." In our world today, there are rival conceptions of matter. For Christians, matter matters. The Incarnation matters. Our whole world, as I said, has been transformed by the Incarnation. So we must defend human dignity, because we understand that without human dignity, without the defense of human dignity, without recognizing that Imago Dei in each other, we cannot have a common life together. We cannot continue to build community together. We cannot continue to advance towards the kingdom together as Christians. Within each of us, and I'm going to speak about this more this afternoon, there's something that Rabbi David Novak, a great philosopher who teaches at the University of Toronto, has called the metaphysical need of every human being. Embedded in that understanding of the metaphysical need that all of us have is a series of questions. Who am I? Who am I in relationship to you? Who am I in relationship to the world in which I live, to creation? Who am I in relationship to God? Or if I don't have a particular theistic belief, who am I in relationship to some philosophy to which I choose to ascribe? This is imprinted on every human being, this metaphysical need, this need to go beyond ourselves and to understand who we are, to seek meaning and to understand our personhood. In our society today, this idea of human dignity, this idea that we are rooted in the Incarnation, that we have this image and likeness, is being challenged in probably the most profound way in human history. We have two rival anthropologies. We have two rival understandings of humanity and of human beings. The first one is what I've been already speaking about, the Judeo-Christian understanding of human dignity, of personhood. And that gets back to this idea of the prosopon, that we have this image that we encounter in one another, that we are persons, not things, not economic units, not simply flesh, not simply spirit, not simply mind. We're all those things together. We are objects. We are not objects, we are subjects. We are not a collection of whats. We are whos. Thomas Cardinal Collins, the Archbishop of Toronto, who is a wonderful Christian leader, he famously said, and I'm paraphrasing him, at a dinner that he had, talking about this question of human dignity and human being a who, being a subject. He famously said about human dignity that one who drools has no less dignity than one who does not. Human dignity radiates from within. And all of us know this. We might deceive ourselves into thinking otherwise, and I'm going to speak about that in a minute, but all of us know deep down in our deepest conscience, in our deepest understanding of who we are, that there is this dignity that we have. And we want that recognized. We want to be looked at. We want to be spoken to. We want to be loved. We want to be in relationship with each other. Human dignity is not about external propriety. You have no less dignity if you're at the moment of death, suffering from a horrific illness. You have no less dignity if you can't walk. You have no less dignity if you have no arms. You have no less dignity if you have a severe developmental disability. It is not about external propriety. It's not about how beautiful you are, how athletic you are, how smart you are. These are all noble things. Dignity is from within. And when we encounter one another, we see that. And please God, we can live that out. And what that allows us to do, when we understand our human dignity in that way, is that it allows us to build community with one another. It allows us to engage with one another, to build our society, to build what we call the body politic, where we come together and through the use of our God-given reason, we help to shape our common lives. We put in institutions that allow us to live together, governmental structures, justice, the administration of justice, ways in which we come together in communities like this to live out our common human life. Okay, that's the Judeo-Christian understanding of human dignity. There's another conception of human dignity that is very different. And we have to be aware of it. And we have to be able to challenge it effectively. And when I say challenge, that's what apologetics is about. Apologetics is the ability to advance what we believe in a winsome fashion, but always, always in charity. Never in an angry way, never in a prideful way, never in an envious way, in charity. But charity and truth, don't equivocate. So we need to equip ourselves as Christians to understand what are rival conceptions of the things we believe out there. There's this other rival understanding of human dignity that I'm going to call implicit atheistic humanism. Why do I say implicit? Because many Christians mistakenly embrace it. It's rooted in an understanding of not the person who is a social creature and has a social nature and desires to be in community with others, but rather it's based on a radical individualism. I am sovereign. I am in charge. I have control. I have rights. It talks about a radical autonomy. I don't need you. I know what's best. And what's that rooted in? Yeah, pride. It's a pridefulness. It denies community. It denies personhood. So when someone believes or has been convinced to believe that when they have a grave illness and they're going to die and they're suffering, that has no dignity and that they're somehow a burden to others, a burden to their family, that is a grave tragedy. Because as Christians, we know that suffering has meaning. Is suffering hard? Absolutely. Very hard. It's hard to see others suffer, especially if it's a very grave form of suffering with great pain. There's nothing, I think, probably harder than to see a young child suffering, a young child in pain, someone we love. But that suffering calls from us compassion, mercy, love. And so we understand that suffering has meaning. To believe that it doesn't have meaning, that somehow your dignity is robbed from you at your moment of greatest suffering, breaks community, breaks that ability to engage with the other person and to see that dignity. So we as Christians, we must always, always strive to speak about the dignity of the other person, because in that dignity we find love. In that dignity we are called to be greater than ourselves. In that dignity we are called to be Christ-like. And so in our common life where we live with one another, Christians and non-Christians, believers and non-believers, we have to represent to people what human dignity is. Sometimes we can be explicit and talk about the Incarnation, talk about what it means to live the Christian life, the life in Christ. Sometimes maybe we can't do that. And we need to present human dignity in ways that speak about mercy, compassion, and Christian virtues. So, you notice that I haven't used the clicker yet. Being in the image of God, the human individual possesses the dignity of a person who is not just something, but someone. Remember, a subject, not an object. He or she is capable of self-knowledge, of self-possession, and of freely giving himself or herself and entering into communion with other persons. Further, he or she is called by grace to a covenant with his Creator to offer him a response of faith and love that no other creature can give in his stead. We are unique as human beings. So, what's to be done? I'm going to explore these questions a bit more in my breakout sessions this afternoon, but maybe just to put them before you now, just to think about them a little bit. How can we advance genuine human dignity in our political, economic, and social institutions? Do we as Christians fully accept the reality of the Incarnation and live it publicly? And then finally, how do we shift our culture away from a dignity that denies the human person? Thank you very much for your attention. Glory to Jesus Christ.